Hi everyone, my name is Kayla Puente and I'm a third-year doctoral student at the School of Education at UC Irvine. Today we will be talking about culturally responsive practices. Before getting started, I would like you to take some time to look at this picture. Imagine you are a teacher or a group leader. Think about the following questions. 1. Who do you think would be more likely to know the answer to your math question? 2. Who do you think would be more likely to want to explain this problem to others? 3. Who would be more likely to cause trouble or be disruptive? And 4. Who is more likely to need help in math? Now, thinking back to your responses, are there any stereotypes that came to mind? If you notice some stereotypes that you thought of when looking back at your responses, you may have some implicit biases. Implicit biases are unconscious biases about people that are contingent on how they talk and look. It's also automatically categorizing people according to cultural stereotypes. We all have implicit biases because of the negative perpetuated messages we hear from society. You may have heard negative messages from the media, friends, and family. Even though we all have these implicit biases, we can work towards reducing them by being aware of people's cultures and backgrounds. This will also allow us to help to build stronger relationships and create a positive, strong community. Overall, being aware and informed of people's backgrounds and cultures can also help to create a positive atmosphere where students feel safe and can fully engage in activities. Before we talk about culturally responsive practices, we need to know what we mean by culture. One definition of culture is that it describes the ways people of different racial or ethnic groups do things based on things like their beliefs, languages, family values, customs, and activities. Among Latinx families, for example, there are two cultural family values that are frequently talked about. The first is familism, or familismo, and it's defined as placing the family as the major source of one's identity. This can look like children translating documents for their parents, parents giving encouragement and motivating their children to achieve higher education, and older siblings helping their younger siblings with homework and the college application process. Respeto translates to respect and refers to the respect that Latinxes have towards those they view with authority. For example, a child is expected to show respeto towards their elders and professionals, such as teachers and doctors. Overall, culture is complex and can change. There can also be within-group differences. For example, among Latinx peoples, there are many within-group differences due to the various cultures and ethnicities that compose Latinxes. When speaking about culture, it is important to avoid endorsing culturally deficit perspectives. Instead, we want to endorse culturally responsive practices. This is particularly important because some people can develop harmful ways of understanding cultural differences. So what is a culturally deficit perspective? According to Silverman, a cultural deficit perspective is comprised of two parts. A, the attribution of an individual's achievement to cultural factors alone, without regard to individual characteristics, and B, the attribution of failure to a cultural group. In other words, a cultural deficit perspective is a view that individuals from some cultural backgrounds lack the ability to achieve just because of their cultural background. In other words, someone with the culturally deficit perspective will blame a person's culture for failures and lower achievements, among other things. A typical example is that Latinx parents do not care about their child's education because they aren't involved in their education. People may then think that Latinx students have lower achievements because Latinx people don't value education. However, there are different forms of involvement that may not be seen by teachers and school districts, such as parents giving emotional support. Even though my parents weren't as involved in my school, they told me every day how important it was for me to go to college. They supported me immensely by encouraging me and taking me to my extracurriculars. I also have another person who can give her personal example as well. Mari is also a Latina who came from a low-income background. From both of our examples, our teachers may have not been aware of our backgrounds and of our cultural values because they had implicit biases that they had about us. Take a listen to her story.
Hi, I'm Mari. I'm a second-year doctoral student in the School of Education, and today I wanted to share with y'all an instance in which my educational experience was negatively affected by my teachers not understanding my cultural and socioeconomic background. So throughout my early life, my mom was very involved with my education. She taught me how to read and write in Spanish when I was 4. She also taught me basic addition and subtraction in my early years of life. But my mom grew up in a poor rural area in Mexico and was only able to attend school up to the third grade. So around third grade, it was kind of the cutoff of where she could offer her support in terms of my academics, particularly in math. And in third grade, I had a teacher who wanted our parents to sign off on our math assignments. So she wanted parents to check the homework and sign off to make sure that everything was right. And so the math assignment exceeded my mom's educational background. So my mom wanted my brother to check the homework instead and sign off. So because my teacher had had my brother the year before, she knew that my brother was the person that was signing my homework was not a parent, and this was something that upset her. So she proceeded to call me out in front of the class and kind of be like, oh, why is your brother signing it? Like, why is your parent not signing it? And to me, it was kind of embarrassing because everybody was staring at me and I didn't feel comfortable like sharing personal things about my family. I also kind of felt like she was judging my mom. Like, there's also a stereotype that Mexicans don't value education. And I kind of felt like my teacher was subscribing to that stereotype. So in that instance, I really would have liked if my teacher had pulled me aside and talked to me one-on-one. I also feel like this instance kind of highlights like how teachers can fail to value Latino students' culture. So Mexicans have a very strong family unit. I think it's also referred to as familism, like being very family oriented, collectivist. And that's why my mom asked my older brother to support me with my homework. And I think that this is something that my teacher didn't really like value. And I think it was a very good thing for both of us. Because my brother was advanced in math, it was good for him to teach me and help me with my math homework. And it was also good for me to get support from someone in the family. So I think that this story really highlights why it's important for educators and teachers to understand students' cultural and socioeconomic backgrounds.
One more example I wanted to share is from a study conducted by Dr. Glenda Flores. Imagine you were tutoring or teaching a youth to solve long division and multiplication problems. They show you how they are doing the math and they are using the methods on the right-hand side of the pictures. Take some time to look at the right-hand side of these two pictures. How would you respond? Would you tell them they are wrong? Dr. Flores found that Mexican immigrant parents were teaching students to solve math problems using a different process. Even though they had the right answer, their teachers marked them wrong. This can deter the support parents give academically and invalidate students' knowledge. Overall, Common Core standards and practitioners as a whole emphasize that there is no one way to get the right answer. This gives further evidence that students should be celebrated for bringing their own funds of cultural knowledge and resources instead of being punished for it. This brings us to culturally responsive practices. These are practices that affirm students' home cultures, increase parent and community involvement in poor and culturally diverse neighborhoods, and advocate for change in the larger society. In other words, it is respecting and supporting students' cultures and backgrounds. In the math example I just mentioned, a culturally responsive answer would be to be open-minded to the way your student learned division, and instead of dismissing it, ask them to explain their process. We also saw a great example at Math CEO earlier this year. A mentee was actually teaching his mentor how to say certain words in Spanish, and the mentor was very engaged. He was showing interest in his mentee's background and culture, which is a great way to also build strong relationships and which also affirmed his mentee's culture. For the last part of this overview, I wanted to talk about how implicit biases and culturally deficit perspectives could lead to what is known as stereotype threat. Stereotype threat is defined as a situational phenomenon that members of negatively stereotyped groups experience when they worry about confirming that stereotype with their performance. Two specific groups that it may affect are women and Latinx youth. In terms of gender, stereotype threat has been associated with gender differences in STEM education, with women underperforming in STEM when they are aware of the gender stereotypes associated with STEM. In terms of Latinx youth, the STEM workforce is very male, Asian, and white dominant, with females, Latinx, and Black students comprising a small portion of awarded STEM bachelor's degrees. Also, 16% of the US workforce is Latinx. However, they comprise only 7% of all STEM workers and are thus largely underrepresented in the STEM workforce. One example of stereotype threat that involves both gender and Latinx youth is the following. There is a science exam at school. I am a Latina, and most of my class may be white students. Even though I prepared a lot for this science exam, I am scared I am going to prove the stereotype that 1, Latinx youth don't do well academically, and also 2, I am a female, and so maybe I'm not as good at science like male students. Because of this stress, I end up maybe not doing as well as I could. There are many ways that you can help to reduce stereotype threat. One way is to establish high standards and resources for support. The youth you work with will more likely trust and respond to criticism when standards are explicitly explained. You should not only establish these high standards, but also provide resources to support them in meeting those expectations. If you set high expectations without support, it may seem unrealistic to the youth you are working with, and so they may feel helpless and may give up. You could also avoid overpraising for mediocre work. Overpraising mediocre work will cause mentees to perceive it as a sign of lowered expectations, which may cause them to not trust your feedback. They may see it as a sign of how you view their intelligence. Finally, you could revise your view of intelligence. This goes back to challenging in-grade societal notions you may have towards the groups of students you work with. Being aware of your implicit biases will help you to challenge those notions and negative stereotypes you may have. We will now move on to the activity portion of this training. Before we dive into some activities, it is important for mentors to understand the youth participants they will be working with. In terms of Math CEO participants, 98% come from Latinx backgrounds, and 33% of students classify as ELL among the participating schools. 89% of the youth are potential first-generation college students, and 84% come from a low-income background. Because the majority come from a Latinx background, it is also important to learn more about Latinx youth in the U.S. Latinxes are actually the largest ethnic minority group in the U.S., with 33% of individuals under the age of 18 being Latinx. 34% of these youth are immigrants, and 72% of Latinx youth come from Spanish-speaking households. When looking at family strengths, 86% of parents who have children under the age of 18 responded by saying that it's extremely or very important to go to college, highlighting the value they place in education. Lastly, parents among Latinx youth are highly involved in their education. As mentioned earlier, some examples of Latinx cultural values are familismo, respeto, and being bien educado or educada. Familismo can look like helping siblings with homework and also thinking about your parents when thinking about your education and educational goals. Respeto, which is respecting authority figures, can look like parents respecting teachers' authority and respecting the decisions the teacher makes. Lastly, being bien educado or educada refers to the education received not only at school but in the home. As I also mentioned earlier, there are many within-group differences among Latinx youth, with different groups having different foods, histories, and customs. For example, my family is from Honduras and my husband's family is from Mexico. We have differences in foods and even differences in our language. You can find more of these examples on Latinx culture in your tip sheet. For the first activity, imagine that you read the school report accountability card. You find out that the student body at this school is 98% Latinx, 99% economically disadvantaged, and only 14% proficient in mathematics. Which version of the problem do you give the students? Why? The warning here is that we should not make assumptions about students' mathematical abilities just because they come from a disadvantaged school. The first version of the problem on the left-hand side breaks the mathematical task in small, easy steps to make it more manageable and help the students. The math structure of the problem is made obvious, and students are explicitly asked to compute all the quantities needed to complete the task. There is no room for creativity and no need for thinking. The instructor is guiding the student step by step through a solution that he or she has already envisioned. This differs from the problem on the right-hand side, which allows students to get creative and exposes them to higher level cognitive demand. Exposing all students to tasks with higher level cognitive demand is an equitable practice. Let us help all students develop critical mathematical thinking through challenging curriculum while offering whatever individualized support each kid needs. For the second activity, please take out a piece of paper and a pen. This activity will involve doing a privilege walk, which is usually done with groups of people taking steps forwards and backwards. However, we have adopted this activity to be more of a reflection exercise to help you reflect on your background. I will read a list of statements. For each statement, you will place a tally on your paper every time the statement is true. Let's begin. Put a tally if English is your first language. Put a tally if either of your parents graduated from college. Put a tally if you never had to skip a meal because you could not afford it. Put a tally if you were encouraged to attend college by your parents or family. Put a tally if you have never been bullied at school because of your gender, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, accent, or language. Put a tally if you or your family inherited money or property. Put a tally if you are a citizen of the United States. Put a tally if there were more than 50 books in your house growing up. Put a tally if you are a white male. Put a tally if you have always felt safe walking in your neighborhood alone at night. Put a tally if you never felt negatively stereotyped by your teacher because of your cultural background. Put a tally if your parents have always been able to help you with your homework. Put a tally if you never felt limited in your potential due to your background. Put a tally if your family never experienced housing insecurity. Put a tally if your parents thought they could not afford to send you to college. Put a tally if others always knew your parents cared about your education. Put a tally if you've never been underestimated in your abilities based on your cultural background. Now take 2 minutes to write down your emotions or how you felt. This activity encourages participants to confront the ways in which society privileges some individuals over others. It is designed to get participants to reflect on the different areas in their lives where they have privilege as well as the areas where they don't. The point of this activity is not to shame you for experiencing privilege. It's more to get you to reflect on your own privilege as well as those around you and keep it in mind in your interactions with others or before you decide to make negative assumptions. For this last activity, take some time to reflect. Are there any implicit biases that you hold towards the students or families you work with? Some examples of implicit deficit biases may be poor people are unmotivated and have weak work ethics, or poor parents are uninvolved in their children's learning, largely because they do not value education. In summary, be aware of people's cultures and backgrounds when working with diverse populations. Don't make negative assumptions or perpetuate stereotypes. Get to know your youth and build strong relationships. And lastly, write down an action plan. How will you incorporate some of the steps in the tip sheets into your relationship with your youth? I hope this training was helpful and helps you incorporate culturally responsive practices into your interactions with your mentees. For more tips, refer to your tip sheets on culturally responsive practices.